I'm Susan Still. I'm a Extension Master Gardener, UVM Extension, and I want to welcome Ann Dempsey from the Rockbridge Library and Ann Hazelrig from UVM. This is the second of 4 educational programs from the Windsor and Windham chapters of the UVM Extension Master Gardeners. Master Gardeners use research-based gardening information to help all Vermonters improve their gardening, leadership, and environmental stewardship skills. The series has been funded through a generous donation from Gardener's Supply and the Windham and Windsor chapters and from individuals. Also, the programs are made possible through the Rockingham Free Public Library, that's in Bellows Falls, and its staff. Thank you, Sam Maskell and Ann Dempsey. You can learn more about Extension Master Gardeners, the library, and the educational series by looking in chat at the bottom of your screen, and I'll put that in later in the workshop. So I want to welcome now Ann Hazelrig. We Vermont Extension Master Gardeners know Ann Hazelrig, PhD, as one of our outstanding teachers in the course we get we take to get our certification. She teaches the unit on plant diseases, and it's just funny if you can imagine a plant diseases being funny, but they are. Dr. Hazelrig is the director of the Plant Diagnostic Clinic at the University of Vermont. Other responsibilities include the Vermont IPM program. IPM, all master gardeners should know what that is. That's Integrated Pest Management.
Very good.
The Vermont Pesticide Education and Safety Program and the UVM Extension Master Gardener Program, and also has research programs addressing disease issues important in Vermont and New England crops. Ann received her undergraduate horticulture degree from Colorado State University, a master's degree in pomology. Is that apple?
Yes.
And plant pathology from Cornell University, and a PhD in plant and soil science at the University of Vermont. Wow. Well, Ann Hazelrig, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I would just like to salute all of you master gardeners. You are awesome. And you know what? When people are asked in Vermont, what do they think of when they think of extension? What is extension? Master Gardener is the program that comes up, 4-H and Master Gardener. So you guys are known all over the state. So, and you're awesome at getting the word out. You were just talking about you doing pollinator education, and you know, you're the ones out in the community. So my hat is off to all you master gardeners. You're great educators. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let's see. There. So I looked over my talk a little bit, and it's a little bit doom and gloom, but because I'm always talking about problems, but the way I see it is, you know, it's job security for me too, because, you know, we're always going to have problems. So it's good. But anyway, right now, we might be seeing some of this in our gardens. We had some cold nights a few weeks ago, and you get that crooking in asparagus. So that's pretty typical of frost injury. Just clip it out and the next one should be fine. Also, I noticed in my garden, I've got some strawberries, and if you see those black centers, that means they've gotten frost damage and they won't produce a fruit. So those can just be clipped off. They should be bright yellow. So I'm going to talk a little bit about current pests and diseases, and also some new things. And I thought I'd start with, you know, after this winter, oh my gosh, there was so much, at least in my yard, there was so much mole and vole damage in yards. I think with the snow cover, they just loved tunneling in there. And the middle picture is vole damage. They sort of have those craters. And then the mole damage, they feed totally underground. And so those moles cause that big eruption of soil. And the mole is on the top. they're pretty cool looking, and the vole is on the bottom. And one thing to remember, moles starting with an M are meat eaters, and voles starting with a V are vegetarians. So moles are the ones out there eating maybe grubs, earthworms, things like that. But the voles are the ones that are girdling plants and feeding on the roots. So both of them caused damage this past winter. I saw a lot of girdled trees because the snow cover was deep and the girdling was high up in the tree. But I think that's because bunny rabbits were like up on their hind legs and the snow was so high. So they girdled trees really high. Anyway, there's no easy control for moles or voles. You know, the sound things don't really work. The repellents don't work. I guess have a heart trap is kind of your best bet. I just sort of squish down all the trails and reseed and hope for a better year next year. And now we'll probably, with such a lot of moles and voles, we'll probably have a lot of owls and foxes. And so it's all a big cycle. The other thing, we're all putting out plants now. We're eager to get going. And I see a lot of this time of year. This is just cold damage on transplants. Tomatoes are really sensitive. So if you put a tomato out now, you know, we may not have frost temperatures, but you're putting them into colder soils and the leaves are tender and they just get that the white color on the foliage. That's just typical cold damage. In tomato, there's a brassica in the middle one. Also, the purpling of foliage is a really common cold injury symptom. That's because of, I think, phosphorus and the anthocyanins don't move as readily in cold temperatures. The top picture is basil. You want to wait till you put your basil out because that's really cold intolerant. But the bottom line on all these is just look at the new growth. And if the new growth looks good, which it usually does, the plants will be just fine. They'll grow right out of this and recover just fine once the soils warm up and the temperatures warm up. The one disease problem that we do see this time of year, this early, is damping off, especially if you're starting your own seedlings. So damping off is a group of 4 or 5 different soil-borne fungi that love it under cool, wet conditions. So if you're starting seedlings and you're keeping them on the cool, wet side, there's not much sun, they can be really susceptible to these pathogens. And the little seedlings just fall over and die, and there's basically no root system there. So if that happens, the best thing to do is kind of start over. You can't really, you know, especially if it's all in one big flat, it's better just dump them out, start them over. And so when you do start seedlings, anything you can do to promote rapid germination is helpful. Start with clean flats. If you reuse your flats, just sterilize them in a 10% bleach solution, wash them out, don't have any soil clinging to them. Heat mats are really helpful. They're not that expensive, but that's a great way to get your seedlings up fast, keep them on the warm side. Basically, you want the plants to outrun the fungi. You want to keep things on the dry side, avoid overwatering, especially when it's cool and cloudy. And always start with a sterile mix. Don't use your garden soil because that has a whole lot more bad fungi in it. So use a sterile mix. And just remember, when you buy a mix at the garden store, if it's really high in organic matter like peat, that will have higher water holding capacity. So you may want to watch that and get something that doesn't have as much peat if you're prone to overwatering. So walking around my yard, it's, you know, I see lots of diseases out there, which is always kind of fun, but this is one that's out there right now, I noticed. This is cedar apple rust, and on junipers, it's so cool. Like in the winter, you just see on that left-hand side, this brown knotty gall. And then when the temperatures get warm and wet in late May, early June, that middle picture, those galls produce these big orange gelatinous spore horns. It looks like they're from outer space. They're so cool looking. But from all those little horns come these spores that are carried on wind currents that are carried to apple trees or crabapple trees, where they infect those leaves and cause result in a different kind of spore that's released that goes back to the juniper. So it's a rust disease, and those are unique. They typically require 2 hosts to complete their life cycle. So if you're an apple orchardist, you don't want to have any junipers growing near your orchard. And if you're a juniper nursery grower, you don't want to have any apples. But unfortunately, in a neighborhood situation, these spores can travel 5 miles. So it's pretty hard to control. But they cause those bright yellow spots on the apple trees and crab apples. And when in really severe years, it can cause early defoliation of crabs and apples. And so a severe year, these orange spore horns will come out when it's rainy. So if it's a dry spring, we won't see as much of this disease, but if it's a wet, they keep rehydrating and producing more spores. So it's kind of a cool one that's out there now. The other one that we're getting ready to see, my peonies are just coming up. I don't really see any buds yet, but pretty soon we'll be having buds. And if we get a rainfall when our buds are, just tightly closed and getting ready to open, if we get a rain, they get covered with this gray, fuzzy spore called gray mold or botrytis. And invariably that happens every spring. And a lot of times you kind of lose those first peony buds. If you do have that, just clip them out, get them away from the peonies. And usually the weather warms up and dries up and the next blooms are fine. This botrytis can also cause this, leaf spotting in peonies. So, and I've noticed I've got a lot of different cultivars of peonies. Some are really susceptible to it and some aren't. So you might want to get rid of the peonies that have it every year. The other option is when the peonies are just coming up, you can use a fungicide, spray a fungicide to protect those leaves as they're coming up for 2 or 3 sprays in the early season. The other thing, cleaning up peonies at the end of the season, because all those spores, those fungal spores overwinter on that dead tissue. So cleaning up the garden and getting rid of all that inoculum before it can grow up through it in the spring is always a good thing to do. This is another good spring occurrence. This is slime mold. This is a primitive fungus that's bright yellow. It often grows on mulch, and it's called the dog vomit fungus. I call it the fraternity boy fungus because it looks like somebody's had an accident out on the lawn. But it's really cool, and it grows fast, so it looks like it moves across your mulch, and then eventually it will produce a sort of a fruiting body, and then it just dissipates when it dries up. You can break it up with a rake. It doesn't hurt anything. It's not pathogenic, but it can grow on grass and strawberries, and it can cut down photosynthetic surfaces, but it's more of a kind of an interesting thing, just nature. Kind of cool though. Pretty soon, coming in April, May, we're going to start seeing eastern tent caterpillars. These are those nasty little caterpillars. You see them in the crotch angles of fruit trees, usually April, May. I haven't noticed them yet, but they're probably out there. And now they're probably very small. And now if you see them, now's the time to get them. Just clean them up, squish them, whatever you do, just clean them out of the crotch angles of trees. Because once they get bigger, they have that white stripe. They really can be voracious feeders. And they go into that nest at night. So you might want to sort of grab that nest at night to get all the insects. But as they get bigger, they just can decimate a tree. All these old Vermonters like to say how they burn these things out of trees, but I don't think that's good. And they always want to use kerosene and stuff like that. All you have to do is You could drown them or squish them or whatever. Don't use a flamethrower though. So a new disease that we have, and it hasn't been identified yet in Vermont, but I think it's just because we haven't gone out and looked for it yet. It's called beech leaf disease. And it's such a dry, I think beeches are so beautiful and they've been so inundated with that other disease, the Nectaria canker and that woolly, I think it's a scale insect. So they've already been weakened by those problems. And now there's this new disease and it causes this, that striping in the beech leaves. And this is one that, if you see it, we'd love to know about it. I know Forest and Parks is going out and looking for this next summer. They're going to scout for it. But beech trees, that map on the right, they have a pretty broad range, and they assume that this is going to affect beeches in all this range. So it causes that stippling, and then it can attack any native or ornamental beech in the landscape or in the forest, and it causes a decrease, decrease in vigor of the foliage that can lead to loss of foliage and eventually loss of the canopy and death. And it can kill them pretty quickly in some cases. And also the main symptom is that striping on the leaves in the spring, thinning of the canopy, and then also you can see that thickening and curling of the leaves. And a lot of times it causes death in 6 to 10 years for mature trees. So this is a kind of an interesting one. They're finding that this is caused by a foliar nematode, which is like a microscopic worm that feeds in leaves. We also have this foliar nematode problem in hostas, and but they're not sure how it's moving around. They think maybe birds are moving these, but a lot of research is going on right now trying to figure out how it's spreading, what can we do for control, and what we can do about this problem. But at this point, everybody's still trying to learn all about it. I just feel like our trees are being inundated with everything. Here's another new disease that's occurring. It's called oak wilt. And this is a fungus disease occurring only on red oaks. And it's a vascular wilt disease, which means that the fungus plugs up the vascular system or the water conducting system of the plant. So what we see is when they plug up all those cells, then those outer leaves can't get water and nutrients, so they start to die back. And a symptom of this oak wilt disease is, partially brown leaf and partially green, and then dieback of limbs. And so far they've found it, the closest is near Albany, I think, but they've eliminated that. So that's a good thing, but it's on our doorstep basically. So this is one we should watch for too. Like I said, the fungus blocks the water and nutrients from the roots to the crown, causing the leaf to wilt and drop. Only red oaks, which is scarlet oak, pin oak, black oak, and they can die within a few weeks to 6 months. And the disease spreads quickly from tree to tree, I guess through root grafts. So one thing they've done in New York, they've tried to break up these root grafts when red oaks are planted near each other. White oaks, I guess, can get the disease, but they take years to die, and the disease doesn't usually spread to additional trees. But so far it's throughout the Midwest and it's spreading in New York. So that's another new one to watch out for. A really distinctive symptom of that disease is this, these spore pads. And this oak wilt is spread by beetles that carry the fungus, or by the root grafts. And I think the spores have kind of a sweet smell and it attracts the beetles. And once it invades the tree, the fungus produces this infection pad where spores are produced and they have a sweet odor that attracts the beetles. And then they move those spores from tree to tree. And the recommendation is don't prune oaks from April to July when these spore pads might be active. And also, like I said, you can stop the below ground spread by cutting root connections. Also, you don't want to move firewood from oak wilt infected areas. And they can use fungicides on high value trees. So they may be doing that in some areas, maybe like Central Park or something. But luckily we don't have that here yet, but another one we're watching for. This is a disease that we do have. It's sort of a native problem, but I've noticed it's just become worse and worse in the last several years. And it's called Rhizosphaera needlecast on spruce trees. And I think it's because we've had, I think it's a climate change thing. We've had really wet springs that these spores are active in the spring. And so every wetting period we have, the spores are liberated from the needles. And you can see these little black fruiting bodies on the undersides of the needles. With your naked eye or a hand lens is helpful. But it starts lower in the tree because the air circulation is porous there. Every rainfall, the spores are liberated, and then they're carried on wind currents and splashed into the upper parts of the tree. So your spruce trees just kind of die from the ground up. And, it may take several years to kill a tree, but you just keep losing those lower branches. You can prune those off, but they'll never, you sort of lose the good shape of the tree. So you don't want to overcrowd spruces because this disease can kill these lower branches. We're also noticing a white pine decline in the past several years. A lot of yellow and browning of needles, premature needle shedding, thinning canopies, undersized shoots and needles, a lot of resinosis and branch dieback, and then the trees die. And they're finding, this is common in New England, Northeast, and they're finding several fungi are involved, a canker disease and maybe a scale insect. Plus climate change is implicated. I think our rainy, cool weather in May and June, and then the stressful, dry summers are all sort of figuring into this disease problem. And I don't know, I've lost a lot of white pines on my land. I don't know if it's this or white pine blister rust, but they're all really, really suffering. We have a new disease. I think it's probably been around a while. I've been misdiagnosing it, but it's called Marsonina leaf spot, and they noticed it in Pennsylvania. We've had a lot of early defoliation in the past few years in crab apples and apples, and I always sort of attributed it to apple scab and cedar apple rust because we've had these wet, cool springs. We've had heavy infection from apple scab, a fungus disease that overwinters on the dead leaves. But now there's this new fungus disease called Marsonina, and I've seen those symptoms of this in C and D, that sort of yellowing and sort of this splotchy, blotchy appearance to the leaves. And I guess for orchardists, it's not that big a deal because the apple scab sprays, the fungicides they're spraying will also control this disease. But for those of us growing apples where we don't spray the tree, or we're growing crab apples and we don't spray fungicides, this really has, we're getting a lot of infection from this and causing a lot of early defoliation. Not death of trees, but just early defoliation, which can sort of cause the trees to lose vigor over time, and then you might have other problems. So the best thing I tell homeowners, home gardeners to do with any sort of apple or crab apple disease problem, any of these fungal diseases, always prune your trees. Just open those trees up to get good air and light penetration into the tree, and you'll have less of those foliar fungal disease problems. Also, less canker disease problems because you're getting rid of any shaded branches or weak branches. And the other thing you can do with crab apples and apples, since those diseases overwinter on the foliage, raking those leaves up is really helpful, getting rid of inoculum for next year. Also, if it's too much to rake up, if you can mow over those leaves and get them to break down quicker, that's a good thing. So a couple of integrated pest management practices you can use. without spraying a fungicide. I mean, you can control these with fungicides, but as home gardeners, I don't want to be out there with a backpack sprayer spraying fungicides. So I'd much rather do this. And we can live with some of this damage. We're not relying on these apples for our livelihood the way commercial growers are. So this is another emerging problem in Vermont and all of New England, well, the whole country really. Crazy snakeworm, and it's an earthworm. We all thought earthworms were good. Well, this guy is not good. It probably arrived 50 years ago in pots, nursery pots from Asia, but it's in a lot of different states. It's a big earthworm, and one of the ways you can identify it, it has that smooth, light-colored clitellum, which is that band around it. And the other way you can identify them is they wriggle like crazy, and that's why they're called crazy snakeworm or jumping worm. And they can grow to be 1 to 8 inches long. They live in the leaf litter of trees, and they can get into our forest plants. They've got glossy skin and that light, smooth clitellum. They're very active, move like a snake, and they can lose their tail if they're handled roughly. And they're parthenogenic, which means they don't need boy worms to make more worms. So that's very efficient. And the reason these guys are so bad is that they feed on the upper leaf litter. And so the forest on the left doesn't have any of these crazy snakeworms. The forest on the right does, and they fed on all that leaf litter. So they just denude the forest. And then, some of the bad plants like buckthorn can survive this. Some of the desirable plants that we want are diminished because of the feeding damage. And they're probably hatching now or in April, a little while ago. Anytime the temperatures are above 50 degrees, these snakeworms hatch, and they can spread as much as 20 to 20, I think, I can't see that totally. I don't know if it says feet or yards in a year. So they're pretty quick spreading. These are the places they've been found so far. And the problem is, they're being spread through nursery plots and in compost. I know a lot of gardeners have called the Master Gardener Helpline and complained about these crazy snakeworms in their mulches that they're buying. So always check when you're buying pots, check them before you put them in your garden that you don't have any of these worms. But the problem with this thing is that their eggs are called cocoons, and they're teeny weeny. They're 2 to 4 millimeters big, and that's the right picture on the right side, and they can survive to minus 40 degrees centigrade. So they're going to make it through the winter just fine. And there's no way, we might be able to pick out the worms in nursery pots, but we cannot pick out these cocoons. So slowly but surely, these are going to get introduced, I think, from nurseries. And I'm a part of a grant. There's a researcher at UVM, Joseph Gores, who's doing a lot of work on this snakeworm, and he's just putting in a grant to try to figure out some organic controls. And that's really what we need is some way to control this pest so we don't have it spread and become a huge problem. Because once it gets into our gardens, then it can escape into the landscape, into forests. Another new pest that we have in 2004 is called Swede midge, and it's a little midge, which is like a little fly, and it only attacks brassicas, which are, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, and it lays eggs on the growing point, and then the little larvae, you can see one of those little larvae in the left-hand picture, feed on those growing points, so that the way that we can diagnose it as gardeners is we just see no heads form, or we see a lot of little heads form on our cabbage and broccoli. The other thing it causes, the larvae can cause a lot of scarring on the stems. There are 3 to 5 generations of these per season, and they can really be a problem in, some farms have these and they've had to sort of abandon brassicas or find all new fields because they've been attacked by this Swede midge. So the best control for these is to, try to rotate your brassica growing areas. Row covers are a good management option. You want to exclude the fly from laying eggs. And I guess the fall broccoli is typically more damaged than the earlier spring broccoli, but that's kind of a new one. Not everybody has it, but it is, I think it's probably in all counties by now in Vermont. So that's Swede midge. Another fairly new pest that we're seeing is called the onion leek moth. See, I sometimes I think I should have, instead of question answer system at the end of this talk, we should have some counselor standing by to work on all this doom and gloom stuff, all these pests in our gardens. But this is onion leek moth, and this is a new one that I've really noticed it in my garlic. It attacks it loves leeks, it loves the scapes of garlic, and it's a little moth that lays eggs, probably laying eggs right now, and then the larvae feed in between the leaves of hollow onions and things, and then you'll see that window painting effect on the left, and it's sort of translucent, and then they love the scapes. So you'll either see the little caterpillar in there with lots of spots, or you'll see the frass, which is the caterpillar poop. It has several flights. First generation feeds on the leaves, but the later generations start moving down into the garlic bulbs and the onion bulbs, so they can become a real problem. We're lucky as home gardeners, we can go through and, hand pick these, or, if they get in your scapes, just harvest those and destroy them. Also, row covers are another good way to exclude the first generation from being able to lay eggs. So you'd want the row covers on now. But this is what the little larvae would look like now. They have these really distinctive pupae. So watch for the pupae after they've completed their life cycle or before they turn into moths. So those are easy to see on the leaves. If you see them, just destroy those. But they have that netted appearance covering the pupae. There's also a new onion pest called Allium leaf miner, and we don't have this yet. We're watching for it, and I suspect it may be in southern Vermont, so you guys might see it before we do. It's good living in northern Vermont because we get the alerts before anybody. It moves up to us later. But this is a little a fly that causes some of the same kind of damage as the leek moth. It causes that leaf mining in that lower left of onions and garlic, and it's a little maggot that feeds. And the way to identify this is you'll see that polka dotting on the leaf, I guess that's an onion leaf, but that's where the fly is oviposited eggs and has fed. So you'll see those polka dots all in a line. And the pupae of this fly, it looks like a little brown, like wheat berry almost. So it looks very different from the leek moth. But this is one that's really caused a lot of millions of dollars of losses in New York State, where they grow a lot of onions commercially. And, they're having to use a lot more insecticides to control this pest. So watch for this one. Let us know if you suspect you see it. But the other problem with this thing is that all these pests cause wounds. So fungi and bacteria can get in afterwards and cause a lot of damage with diseases. Gosh, another one. Spotted winged Drosophila. This showed up in 2011. It's a real teeny weeny small fruit fly from Asia, and it leapfrogged its way across to the East Coast. And then I think in 2011 was Hurricane Irene. And so Hurricane Irene blew it up into Vermont. And this little fruit fly, we've always had fruit flies, but this one is bad because it's got on its ovipositor, it has those saw-toothed ovipositors that you can see in that lower left. So it cuts into healthy, soft fruit, not just rotting fruit like other fruit flies, but it will attack any soft fruit. So it'll attack honeysuckle, anything that has a soft fruit. And plus it'll attack all of our small fruit crops. It'll attack strawberry, but it hasn't built up high enough to be a problem in strawberries because that's early in the season. But it's really a problem for our fall raspberries and our late blueberries. So this has been a devastating pest for New England growers, especially organic ones. You can control it with conventional pesticides, but we have a lot of organic small fruit growers in Vermont, and there are two different materials that work, spinosad and pyganic, and you have to alternate them because you don't want resistance to build up. And one of them works well, the other one doesn't work so well. So you're not getting really good control. And also they're finding resistance developing in some of these organic sprays. So a lot of our small fruit growers have started building these whole big, huge tunnels, or growing their small fruit in tunnels just to exclude this fly. And as home gardeners, it's good because we can use netting to exclude this pest. Oh, this is what happens is they lay eggs in this small fruit, and you can see the little larvae or maggots on the left-hand picture. And this picture on the right was a grower up in Maine that left the raspberries on the counter overnight, and this is all the larvae that developed. That is just gross. And it'll cause your berries to just break down really fast. And I know people, a couple of years ago, we saw a lot of that in blueberries, that blueberries looked great, people had a great crop, and then they broke down and just sort of melted away really fast. And it was probably because of this spotted winged Drosophila. And if you do think you might have it, or you want to figure out if you have it, I've talked to a lot of growers that say, oh no, I don't have it. I didn't see any worms. Well, take some of those berries and you put them in a saltwater solution and you sort of mash them up, wait a few hours or whatever that says, I can't see, 10 minutes. And that the salt will cause the larvae to come out and you'll be able to see them floating with your naked eye. So that's a way to find out if you do have that problem. And they really don't become a problem until the fruit starts to ripen. So that's good. You can let your raspberries grow just fine now without a net, but before they start to ripen, you want to put up a net. And I was just joking, it's like, I think soon we're going to have to cover everything. So it's just like in The Graduate, it's all back to plastics. We all need plastics, row covers. Vermont needs to just buy into row covers. That's my investment advice, is invest in row covers. But with the spotted winged Drosophila, this is what a lot of growers have done on that bottom left. They've just created a hoop system. You can buy PVC pipe and bend it. But you need to use this special netting that has really small mesh called Protect 80. And if people are interested, I can send you a link as to where to find that. You can find it certain places in Vermont. But that will keep out the insect, and you really have to secure it so they can't get down under it. And then when you want to pick, you have to go in there and pick or raise it up and then seal it back. And it's good to pick every day. Put your fruit right in the refrigerator, so if there are larvae in there, they stop developing. And the larvae eating them won't hurt you. It's extra protein, but just doesn't sound very appealing. So, but this netting is great for home garden use. This is another new insect that we don't have yet, and I'm hoping we don't get it. It's really beautiful. It's called the spotted lanternfly, and it's really a problem in the mid-Atlantic states. It's beautiful. It's got those polka dots. It's a plant hopper. So it has a piercing, sucking mouth part. It's not a moth. This is where it's been found so far, and I think they found them in Maine on the coast. So I'm hoping that in Vermont, we're just going to be too cold for this pest, but they just, they love grapes. So grape growers are really worried about this pest, and they just cover the fruit and the leaves, and they suck out the plant juices. And they also produce a lot of honeydew, which is the sticky sweet excrement that will grow on the grapes and the leaves. And then the sooty mold grows on that excrement. So it just makes a huge mess. But they can, they like certain trees. They prefer Allianthus, which is tree of heaven. And I don't know if we have those. I guess we do have those in Vermont. I don't know what they look like. And they like black walnut. So that's where they'll lay their egg masses, but they can lay their eggs anywhere. And I'll show you what an egg mass looks like. And this is what the nymph looks like on the left. They're bright, beautiful insects. These guys, the way they may make it to Vermont is they're good hitchhikers. So if you're going down to Connecticut or Maryland, check your car when you get back, just like the brown marmorated stink bug. Those were covering cars down in the DC area, and then we drive our cars back up and then spread these pests around. So this is what the egg masses look like, almost like mud pressed to the, sort of like a codling moth, no, not gypsy moth, egg mass, but they're darker and they look more muddy. But that's what the egg masses look like, and they lay them on anything basically, just like gypsy moth. So that's one we're looking for, and we'd love to know if you happen to see them. We're hoping they won't overwinter. And we just need to get rid of any tree of heaven plants so they can't overwinter on those. This pest, viburnum leaf beetle, we had this problem several years ago, and then it sort of disappeared. I think a lot of the nursery growers stopped growing and selling viburnums because it was such a big issue. And the reason this pest was such a problem is that both the larvae and the adult feed on the plants and cause, it's sort of a double whammy. The larvae are on the undersides of the leaves and do a lot of damage, and then they pupate, and then the adults emerge, and then the adults cause a lot of damage on the foliage too. You can control them organically with spinosad or entrust for the larvae. The adults are really much harder to control. So now is the time to go out and look at your viburnums, look at the leaf undersides and see if you see those larvae, and nip it in the bud with some entrust organic. They can just defoliate, and they're voracious feeders. And they have those spots on them. The thing you can do in late winter, early spring is before the viburnums leaf out, you can see on the last growth, the new growth on the plant, those are all, I think they're egg masses or egg cases where they've laid eggs. So you can prune those out. Those are easy to see with the naked eye. So you can go through your viburnums, prune those out and destroy them, and you'll really decrease the amount of pests that you have. This is a really common problem, not a new invasive thing, but you rarely see this bug, but you see the damage. It's called four-lined plant bug, and it has those four bright yellow, orange or yellow or green lines on it, and it causes these angular leaf spots. It looks like a fungus disease, but they love basil, Shasta daisies, mints, a lot of herbs. And, it just looks bad. And the nymphs are the bottom picture. They're bright reddish black. They also cause that same damage. And, for us, you just try to pick leaves that don't have it. If you do have basil that you really want to protect, you could put a row cover over that just to exclude this pest. The other problem with row covers is, they do sort of increase the humidity inside, so it does make your plants more susceptible to some of the fungal diseases. But you wouldn't want to spray for this pest because they're around all summer. You'd have to spray all the time. Flea beetles, another really common one. As soon as we put our plants out, the flea beetles are really attracted to them. So good thing to do with that is, there's a flea beetle for every plant. There's one flea beetle that attacks brassicas, another one that attacks cucumbers. So if you're putting out transplants, try to delay them so they get a little bit bigger and they've got more leaf surface so they can withstand this. And there are lots of different species. Yeah, plant later, use row covers. Spinosad, that entrust, that's a good organic control for flea beetles. Generally, if the plants are big enough, they won't cause that much damage. But if you put out teeny weeny transplants or start things from seed, they can just decimate the plants. Striped cucumber beetle is another one that if you're going to put out cucumber plants, put them out when they get a little bit bigger because they can just decimate new seedlings. A lot of our commercial growers take their flats of cucumbers or whatever, and they dip the whole flat in this organic clay called Surround. It's a kaolin clay that is an anti-feedant for cucumber beetles. So it turns the plants, they're coated in this white clay, but that's fine because there are no cucumbers on there. But it buys the plant, a couple weeks without these cucumber beetles feeding on them so they can get a little bit bigger. You can also use row covers for these, and row covers until they start blooming basically. And then you need to take the row covers off because they need to be pollinated. But that's not a new pest, but one we have every year. And the reason it's bad, they do a lot of damage to the foliage, but also it can move around a disease called bacterial wilt and can kill your cucurbits that way. So if you see a rapid wilt of your cucumbers, it's often because of that bacterial wilt. This is another pest of squash, not a new guy, but they just gross me out. They just look like little spiders. I don't like spiders, but they're squash bugs. There's only one generation per year. They almost look like big aphids. They're gray with those black legs. They scurry around. The best way to control them is look in the crotch angles on the leaf undersides of your squash leaves, and they lay these root beer colored barrel shaped eggs. And if you see those, you can squish them, get rid of those before they even hatch. But they can do a lot of damage to foliage. They can also feed on the fruit and do a lot of damage on the fruit. So these guys are I just hate the way they look. Again, you could try something like Pyganic, which is an organic insecticide, but it's best to try to squish them early on. Another disease that we've had show up in the last several years is called Downy mildew of basil. It's a fungus disease that seems to appear every year in July. And this, if you're using row covers, downy mildew might show up earlier. But on the upper side of the leaf, that looks like cold injury to me. But if I saw that in July when I knew it wasn't cold, I would think it's downy mildew. And if you turn the leaf upside down, you'll see these brown, dirty spores. And that's, once the plants get it, you're done. Because you don't want to spray them with a fungicide, because you don't want to eat that stuff. So I always say if you're if you're a pesto maker, make sure you harvest early in the season. Don't wait till July to make all your pesto. Make some early on. They are coming up with some resistant cultivars. Rutgers has come up with a bunch, so you can watch for those. Devotion, Passion, and Thunderstruck are all downy mildew resistant. And I guess they're not as good as I've heard as the other basil that we make pesto with, but they do a good job. They're not immune, but they do a good job resisting the disease. Tomato leaf spot diseases, we have those every year to some extent. The best ways to manage those are to rotate, stake your tomatoes so they get good air circulation, use drip irrigation, don't water them. Irrigate, that was creative spelling on drip irrigation. Use a mulch as a barrier because the spores overwinter on the fallen leaves, and they'll be discharged around July 1st. So if you put a mulch down, they can't blow up onto the lower leaves. And you want to keep up the fertility. That helps the plants sort of outrun this disease. And if you do fungicides, you usually have to start those around July 1st. Maybe you can get by with just a few sprays just to get them through the main part of the season. But just remember, on all these fungus diseases, they all work the same way, and almost all of them require 6 to 8 hours of leaf wetness or needle wetness to infect. So any way that you can keep your plants dry, either by pruning, with trees and shrubs, or staking, or using drip irrigation. Tomato growers, all of our commercial growers don't grow field tomatoes anymore. They've all put them in a greenhouse just to manage that leaf wetness and eliminate those fungal diseases. So anything you can do to eliminate that leaf wetness, you'll have fewer fungal diseases. The good news is the past couple of years, we haven't had any late blight, which is another really aggressive leaf spot disease of tomatoes that does not overwinter in Vermont. So it doesn't matter if you rotate your tomatoes or not. It just depends on whether that disease, it overwinters in Florida, and it will leapfrog its way up the coast depending on what storms do over the course of the summer. And it causes these big greasy leaf spots, causes cankers. That's the upper right-hand side. It can rot the fruit really fast. And this is the one that caused the late blight in the 1840s. And it can wipe out a field in 5 to 7 days if we have cool, wet conditions. And it attacks both tomato and potato. If you have your tomatoes in a greenhouse, they're not safe. If it shows up in Vermont, we alert all of our commercial growers that they need to apply fungicides in greenhouses if it's in the area. So anytime the humidity is over 85%, their plants are susceptible. We try to post on the Master Gardener website when it shows up in Vermont, and this is another one that's good. Usually Massachusetts has it first, and we watch for it as it moves up the coast. There's a cool website you can go on called USA Blight, and you can see where it's been diagnosed, and all the plant pathologists put in their information when they first see it in their state. And this one, you can't, you have to protect your plants with a fungicide if you don't want them to get this disease. You can use copper. That's a good organic fungicide. It doesn't work as well as the conventional ones. I always get questions about, can I put my diseased plants in a compost pile? And it depends. Late blight, you can put late blight leaves in there because it won't overwinter in Vermont. And if you have a good hot compost, it'll take care of it. The spores don't live on dead tissue. For apple scab, botrytis, if you've got good hot compost and some of the tomato leaf spot diseases, yes, you can put them in your compost. But if you've got a disease that has a long-term overwintering structure, then you probably can't put it in a compost. So it kind of depends on what disease you have. And there's a disease called ergot that has a sclerotia, long-term overwintering structure. You wouldn't want to put that in a compost. or tree branches put in a compost because they just won't eat them. But foliage, for the most part, is okay, especially if you have a good hot compost. The past few years, it's, you know, I came from the Midwest, and I hated summer weather in the Midwest, and that's why I loved living in Vermont. But anymore, it seems like we are getting more and more Midwest weather. In the middle of our summer, it's getting really hot. We're having high temperatures, hottest summers on record for the past few years. And with that, we notice problems in the garden. We can have, with water fluctuation in tomatoes, we can get blossom end rot. That's when calcium's not moved well throughout the plant, and you get that rot on the bottom ends of tomatoes. Usually it's the first flush of fruit that happens with. Anytime we have over 90-degree days, you'll get blossom drop in tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers. Also, the bees don't want to work. You'll get more male blossoms in squash plants. So the hot temperatures, you'll get poor pollination. So you might see weird looking fruit. So that's been sort of a problem with this hot, dry weather. We've seen some weird disease problems. Also, when we have hot weather, we usually have high humidity, and we see a lot more powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is a fungus disease that doesn't require leaf wetness. It actually is inhibited by leaf wetness. It only requires high humidity. And powdery mildew, most fungus diseases in plants are very host specific. So if you see powdery mildew on your lilac, it's not the same one that attacks your cucumber or phlox. So they're all different powdery mildews, but they all like the same kind of conditions. So you'll all see it. You'll see it on your plants when conditions have been hot and high humidity. But they're very host specific. There are a lot of good organic controls for powdery mildew. Horticultural oil is a good one. Neem oil is another good powdery mildew control. Some of the Armacarb, the baking soda sprays, will also control powdery mildew. Anything you can do to spread plants out too, so you don't have as high a humidity, will help. Potato leafhopper, I just have a few more slides, hopefully, I think. I'll wrap it up. Potato leafhopper, this is an insect that doesn't overwinter in Vermont. It blows up on storm fronts, usually around the third week in July. And this is, this little insect injects a toxin when it feeds. It's got a piercing, sucking mouth part, causes a lot of problems in beans and potatoes. It'll cause dieback on our early potatoes. That leaf edge dieback is pretty typical of potato leafhopper. I saw it on my maple trees a couple of years ago. They were feeding on the new foliage of the maple tree. That's the bottom right picture. I also was looking at trees at Home Depot, and that damage on the apple tree, that leaf edge dieback, that's all caused by potato leafhopper. I've seen it in raspberries too. If you turn the leaf upside down and you see a little insect running sideways, or if you're walking through a field and things are flying up, that's probably potato leafhopper. And the threshold on these is really low. It doesn't take much to cause this damage. Usually growers just live with it because you'd have to spray a lot, but you could spray something like Pyganic if you have that's an organic insecticide, if you have a plant that you really want to protect. Okay, so managing all these problems, IPM was mentioned. That's all. What we always want to do is just common sense, basically. It's a fancy word. It means integrated pest management. Growers, farmers, gardeners have been doing it forever. And it's just a strategy to prevent or suppress pests with the minimum impact to human health, the environment, and non-target organisms. And it basically is, we want to use all strategies possible before we use any pesticides. So you can look at this IPM pyramid or triangle. So we always want to start at the bottom, use any kind of cultural practices first, like the right site, good plant selection, use good sanitation, rotation. Next is physical, mechanical means like using row covers. Next step would be using a biological control, like some of the good guys in your gardens, and then the last resort would be a chemical pesticide. You want to use organic stuff first, And then the last step would be using a conventional pesticide. So it's just it's common sense. None of us want to be out there spraying any kind of pesticides. And luckily, as home gardeners, we don't really need to. There are a lot of good guys in the garden. The one on the upper left-hand corner, a lot of people don't recognize this one. It looks like a bad guy, but it's a good one. It's a larvae of a ladybug. So that's a great good guy to have in your garden, feeding on all those aphids. Both the adult and the larvae will feed on them. The middle picture is a green lacewing larvae. That's a good guy. On the upper right, that's a hoverfly larvae. That's another good guy. Soldier beetles, spiders, all of those things are good guys. And that's another reason we don't want to use too many insecticides in a garden, even if they're organic, because we don't want to control the, harm the good guys. Some of the best things you can do, keep your plants healthy, make sure they've got the right sunlight, the right pH. If you're trying to grow blueberries, make sure that pH is, in the 4.5 range. Make sure there's good soil drainage. Use good fertility, nutrients, and fertilizers. Use proper irrigation. Also, I think having a diverse landscape is really good. You are finding, we're having to remove all our ash because of emerald ash borer. So I think we want to have a diverse landscape, hedge our bets. So we don't grow all monocultures, so we can't lose all one plant. I think using drip irrigation, if you can do that, avoid overhead watering, because that's what creates that leaf wetness. That's a good practice. Making sure you rotate your garden plants, even if it's across the garden, that's still good, because they're soil-borne diseases that like certain plants, and you want to rotate among your families. You want to keep all the solanaceous plants together and rotate those as a group, and that will just help to decrease some of the primary inoculum. It's tough in community garden situations and in small gardens, but it is a help. I've got raised beds, so I try to mix things up. I have to write down where things are because I can't remember from one year to the next. Using good sanitation, that's always a good thing to do. If you've got a canker on a small limb or a branch, cut it out. There's no cure for that. Just remove it. Don't drop it right there. Burn it, get rid of it. Same thing if you've got a planting of spinach or chard that's got leaf spot and you're done with it, you've got another planting, get rid of it. Don't let it provide inoculum for the new planting. This also includes weeds. We want to keep things pretty weed free, because a lot of these weeds can harbor some of the same pathogens that get on our crop plants. Using a mulch will also help, especially with tomatoes and, rain splash. That helps from keep the spores sequestered underground so they don't splash on the lower leaves. You can use any kind of mulch, plastic, straw. What you don't want to use is the volcano mulch like this picture. That really is a problem because anytime you pile up mulch that high, you'll cause those stems will stay really wet, and that causes a lot of canker problems. Always look for resistant cultivars when you can, especially with vegetables. That's a great way to never have to spray a pesticide. Plants on the left were not tolerant to powdery mildew. The plants on the right were resistant. And try to, we don't want to grow trees like this. This was a tree that I saw in Burlington. It was in April, and I saw it from a distance in the parking lot. I thought, oh my gosh, that red bud or that crabapple is blooming already. And I got closer, and it was a totally fake tree. But you know what? Those don't get diseases. So maybe that's what we're all going to end up with. But anyway, that's it. Sorry to be so doom and gloom, but it's all interesting stuff. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I can end this show. And I'll stop screen sharing, I guess.
So, Anne, thank you so much. I've collected a lot of the questions. So
okay.
Let me get through these, and then we can see what is left. There are a couple of questions about trees.
Yeah.
So two questions about oaks. One is, what are root grafts?
Root grafts are just when the tree is planted next to each other and the roots just grow into each other and connect. So yeah, some trees do that and some trees don't. And I guess pin oaks, red oaks, they commonly do that. So they'll cut a trench so they can't do that.
Another question about oaks. Someone has read that oak leaf litter can suppress the jumping worms.
Well, I don't know. That's a good, all the tannins in there it's worth a try. I think if it really did suppress them, chemical companies will figure that out and they'll market oak leaves and they'll sell them. But I'll mention that to Joseph. We're going to try using some Beauveria bassiana, which is a fungus that attacks insects. So we're going to try to attack these earthworms with this fungus disease. But I don't think there's any silver bullet yet, even if maybe the oaks leaves suppress them. There's no silver bullet yet. So stand by on that one.
We have a question about the spruce disease. What if you keep your spruces pruned around the base near to the ground? Will that help?
Yeah, it probably will help, because it'll improve air circulation around there. If you don't keep them crowded, that will help. They may still get it if we have a really rainy spring and you have lots of spruce. But yeah, pruning in them will help somewhat.
And can you suggest a wildlife safe fungicide or home mix?
I can't recommend home mixes because as a pesticide educator, you can't recommend anything that's not gone through the EPA process. But that being said, if you look on the web, there's a lot of this baking soda spray is a really good fungicide, and that's why the chemical company has formulated it, and it's called Armacarb, but that should be safe for wildlife. It's baking soda, might even be a deterrent. Copper, that probably is not so good for wildlife. Sulfur is another one that's an organic fungicide. That's probably not so good for wildlife, but the horticultural oils can often work as a fungicide, and so those probably wouldn't damage wildlife.
What are row covers?
Row covers are just it's like a spun bonded netting that's called Rime, or you can get it at any garden store. It'll come either in growers buy them in a big roll, but you can go to a garden store and you maybe can get a small roll or like 20 feet of it. And it's just a barrier, a physical barrier to prevent insects from getting into your plants. So you can buy some of this row cover. You can, one kind is a floating row cover where you just put it over the plants and give them a little bit of room and then they push up the row cover. The other thing you can do is I've bought like thin PVC pipe at Home Depot, and you cut lengths of that and then you can bend those and put the row cover over that, and then you want to seal it with soil. Those work well. So that's row cover. But I think it's a great way to never have to use an insecticide to exclude some of these pests. It does cut down sunlight, so that's the bad part about it. And so you may not want to leave it on all season, but for some of these early pests, you may want to leave them on long enough to give them a good start and then take it off.
Is there a beneficial nematode that can combat Drosophila?
Not that they've found yet. There are beneficial nematodes that I guess are supposed to work on grubs And also on onion maggot and cabbage maggot, they've found beneficial nematodes can help. But spotted wing, no, they haven't found anything yet. And there are a lot of people working on this because this has been devastating to a lot of small fruit growers, especially organic ones.
Can you tell us about some organic pesticides?
Organic pesticides, yeah, so, or a pesticide is just anything that kills something. So pesticide is just a generic term. So for pesticide, there are fungicides that kill fungi. There are pesticides that kill insects. There are molluscides that kill slugs and mollusks. So pesticide is a general term, but as far as fungicides, organic fungicide, pesticides, copper and sulfur are the main ones that have always been used. Now we have armicarb, that's a baking soda fungicide. There's also some other bacillus fungicides. I'm trying to think what the trade names are. And I can't think of what the trade name is for that, but there's a Root Shield is another fungicide that you can use in soil flats that it's a fungus that attacks, it's a good fungus that attacks the bad ones. As far as organic insecticides, Entrust or Spinosad, those are the two, somebody called that the organic 7. So that has a broad range. That's a good one to use. You should be able to find that at a garden store. Dipel is another good organic insecticide that works on lepidopteran larvae, like so moth and butterfly larvae. So they'd work for cabbage moth and cabbage butterfly. Pyganic is another one made from, I think, chrysanthemum flowers. That's an organic insecticide. Yeah, there's a fair number out there. They're never as good as the heavy hitters, the conventional ones, but insecticidal soap, that's another one that I've used before for aphids and sucking pests. That's a good all-around insecticide that will not cause a lot, that's not soft on beneficials. So one thing I will mention, I did include my email address at the beginning of the slides. It's just ann.hazelrig@uvm.edu, no E for the Ann. You're always welcome to email me, and I can help you with any of these questions, throughout the summer. We're not taking any samples anymore in the plant diagnostic clinic from home gardeners because of COVID. Hopefully next year, everything will be back to normal, but still you can call the Master Gardener helpline. We can, or not, you can use Ask Extension. We're doing it all through Ask Extension on web, or you can always email me and I can help with questions. You can send me pictures, which is always a great way to start. A lot of times I can figure out something from pictures. So I just wanted to throw that in there, that I'm happy to help you throughout the growing season.
So we have 2 more questions and 3 more questions. Have people seen army worms this year?
Army worms, that's kind of a generic. I haven't seen too many. I guess they can be a real problem in high tunnels. Some of the high tunnel greenhouse growers have seen them, and they can really cause a lot of damage. They're little, they overwinter. I don't know if they overwinter as larvae, but they're like cutworms, or I think are a type of, I don't know, I get army worms and cutworms all mixed up, but army worms typically go across the landscape and feed on everything. Cutworms typically cut off stems, and cutworms are a problem every year to some extent. Army worms, the ones that attack hayfields, are not always a problem. So I have not seen the real army worm.
How do you prevent apple borers?
Oh boy, the apple borers wiped out a whole little orchard of mine. And I think because my trees were always stressed because I grew them, they were in too wet of soil. But the best way to prevent apple tree borers are keeping up the vigor of your apples or crabapple tree with fertilizer, keeping the weeds down. So, removing the turf around the base of the tree and then using a couple inch layer of mulch. Anything you can do to keep down weeds because they like to lay their eggs where they're more hidden. The other thing you can do is use hardware cloth. You want to bury it a little bit into the soil, and then I would just take it all the way up to where the first branches are and then sort of seal it around the trunk of the tree to exclude them. I know mouse guards don't always work, and I've had them get in there underneath the mouse guards. But apple tree borers are depressing. So I think, keeping the weeds down, keeping the fertility up, removing stress from the trees, and then using hardware cloth to exclude them. Those are all good things. Plus, the hardware cloth also, we had a lot of rodent damage this past year on fruit trees. So that will protect your trees from rodent damage too in the spring, and still let air circulation and light into those trunks too. But it has to be narrow enough, so it can't, so the borer can't get in. So, probably more like screening some of the finer hardware cloth rather than the bigger hold stuff is better.
One more question about pesticides. Aren't a lot of these pesticides still broad spectrum and should still be used with smart timing and caution?
Yes, always. A pesticide, even if it's organic, it's still a pesticide. It still will kill things. So most are broad spectrum. Like an example of one that's not is the dipel that only will kill lepidopteran larvae. So that's a good one to use. It doesn't hurt bees. It doesn't hurt anything else. So the goal is to not ever use a pesticide, period. And as home gardeners, we don't have to use them very much. If you do have to use a pesticide, use them in the evening, the early evening when bees are not active. And you want to make sure that you really read the label and make sure you are following all the label directions. But even the organic insecticides could kill some of the good guys. So it's best just to, not use anything, use all those other IPM principles and not use pesticides. My email again is Ann, A-N-N, Hazelrig, H-A-Z as in zebra, E-L-R-I-G-G @uvm.edu.
And one last question, which I can answer, which is this recording going to be available? And everyone who has registered for this workshop will get an email sometime next week with a link to the recording. So you can, people who missed it today or people who want to review it, because there was a lot in there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's always so wonderful to hear you talk. You'll be able to get that. And Ann Dempsey, did you have anything to add from the library?
Not really, but I thank you for an excellent program. We really appreciate all you sharing your knowledge.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know about all the bad stuff. I'm a horrible gardener, but I know what all the problems are.
So we do want to invite everybody to the next in the series. A couple of master gardeners, including me, are talking about gardening for pollinators, how to restore habitat in your own backyard. And we're going to be saying some things that are opposite to what you said today, Anne. Which is leaving messes in your garden.
Oh, okay.
And leaving, for example, leaving some things up over the winter for stem nesting bees and so on. So it's a real balancing act to keep.
It is,
keep
and I
your-
think that's good. That's good, because I have things to learn there too.
Yeah, so you have to keep your diseases down, but you also need to provide habitat
Yeah,
for the beneficials. And it's a real lesson in how complicated the web of life is.
yes.
So
Well, I want to thank you, everybody, for staying on the call, and thank you for being master gardeners, whoever is a master gardener. I really appreciate it.
and please join the Master Gardener program. We would love to have more Master Gardeners, so you can find out about that at UVM Extension. So happy gardening, everybody.
Yeah, enjoy the beautiful day.